My name's Clyde Lewis. I run a radio show called Ground Zero. Are you familiar with it? You know what's really amazing is that I have found that a lot of the time this year I've been talking about chemtrails. I've been talking about weather formations. I've been talking about weather control and how it all affects us and how the toxicity of our skies are creating something called sickness behavior. Now, you can look this up. There is a terminology that people are feeling sick or they're feeling undue stress or they're feeling badly and they don't know why. And they go to their doctor and it's all idiopathic. They say it's idiopathic, they don't know what's going on. Take a pill, you'll feel much better. And I have been through this. I'm sure many of you have been through this. And we are finding ourselves in a situation where you can go back 20 years and you won't remember maybe 25 years past where every commercial on television is about either a lawsuit towards Big Pharma or drugs that will help you with things like bowel problems, lung problems, erectile dysfunction, all of these problems that we've all of a sudden became afflicted with. And you can trace back the time to the 1990s. And I know that in my experience doing my show since 1995, that it was nearer to 1998 and 1999 where we were concerned about chemtrails. And it started off with the idea that people were getting flus whenever chemtrails would come over or they would act differently. And so there were speculations about mind control. There were speculations about how this affected all of us. And what they're beginning to find is that the weather and the toxicity of our planet right now is creating something called pro-inflammatory cytokines. And what pro-inflammatory cytokines do is they actually create the feeling of malaise, the feeling of disease. And this has been going on now for some time. And they've had a hard time trying to pinpoint exactly what's causing it. But the big question is why these cytokines are being released in the body, but many Americans are feeling overall weariness and fatigue. A 62% jump in the sales of energy drinks. Now, why is that? Because people are feeling weary. They have that sick feeling. They don't know what's going on. They need energy. But Americans are the most of the consumers. Americans in the U.S. energy drink sales have grown by more than 5,000% since 1999. So is it any coincidence that in 1999 the first analysis of the chemtrails began? That's when it happened. In that year, I was first confronted with questions about aerosol testing that was carried out by planes at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. And what they were doing is they were spraying stimulants in the air. Programs included unknown testing of biochemicals on the people of the United States. Some of these reports showed that citizens were sprayed with various chemicals resulting in dementia, miscarriages, impotence, headaches, neuralgia, herpes zoster, nausea, irritable bowel syndrome, birth defects, and low-grade fevers. By the year 2000, there was a great deal of money going into advertising of drugs that allegedly alleviated these very problems, from Prilosec to Viagra to specially modified over-the-counter medications for migraines. And these new miracle drugs were developed in the early 1980s, tested and prepared for approval, and many of these new drugs were developed allegedly to counteract the effects of an environmental accident that was caused by bioweapon open-air experimentation on the American people from the 1940s and another that took place prior to the declassified documents were released in 1977. There were times when they would drop toxic chemicals on a city to see if flu or any other diseases could take place. Through the U.S. Army Special Operations Command gave evidence of at least 3 covert techniques for attacking and poisoning crops and animal products that have been examined under field conditions. One of them included the deliberate spraying of neurotoxins on crops, cows, and sheep. Helicopters were fitted with spray tanks, and later C-130s were also fitted with tanks that would spray a chemical trail over a large area. Basically, there were modifications of strains of brucellosis, and they were made in order to spread it into enemy troops, but it would actually pass on to other populations. They knew how it spread. They monitored the spreading during the Gulf War. The modifying of diseases is what they were putting out, modified diseases, and so the modifying of these diseases created a disabling bacterium that disappeared after the infection. Troops could be infected yet exhibited no signs of the bacteria when examined by a doctor. Bioengineers created a stealthy weapon. They extracted the active agent of brucellosis from the brucellosis bacteria, although the active agent in the mycoplasma would still be there. The bacteria have been discarded, and your blood test will be negative even though you were infected with brucellosis mycoplasma. They go in and they say, we can't find anything wrong with you. But why am I tired, Doc? Who knows? When you're looking at these clandestine tests, they were conducted by the CIA. They were closely monitored by the National Institute of Health and the CDC. They were encouraged by what was seen in the skies. Look at what it's doing to people. Okay, Tamiflu was created to combat the symptoms of contrail toxin sickness. Once again, the pro-inflammatory cytokines cause depression. They just realized that pro-inflammatory cytokines cause depression. Lack of vitamin D causes depression. Most people in the United States right now are depressed. Most people are undiagnosed depressives. Okay? They haven't been diagnosed, but they know that something's wrong. They just can't put their finger on what's wrong with them. Now, you can pop a couple pills to see if that helps you, but what really helps you is knowing the nutritional value of what you're eating, and most of that is also being affected by the toxicity of the trails. Roundup, putting that in the body, it might cause cancer. But what it is that Monsanto, they hire scientists to basically sign off on science that they've created themselves. If Harvard or the CIA or NOAA or NASA is behind it, it's got to be good for you. It's got to be great. It's all for science. But see, science is all political now, if you quote Bill Nye the Science Dupe. Bill Nye the Science Lie. It's all political. It's all political. Yeah, you know what political science gives you? Eugenics. So check your telomeres, check your DNA, and check your vaccines. They want us all drugged, they want us all sick so we can put more money in the coffers of Big Pharma. They're getting kids hooked on OxyContin at 11 years old. So when it comes to laying the trails down for the troops, which they did in the 1990s, in the War of 1991, troops initially were told that no such infection existed. Gulf War syndrome, it's BS. It's not real. It's psychological. Fibromyalgia, psychological. Morgellons, psychological. You're making it up. It's not real. What are these little crawly things in my arm? Oh, it's nothing. It's just lint. That's what they do. Slowly, over the years, authorities were forced to admit that something had triggered severe illness in many Gulf War veterans. By then, a variant of the modified brucellosis had spread to civilian population. This is where we get Epstein-Barr. People began suffering from general debilitation, tiredness. When it became known that the contagion was spreading into the general population, top officials with the National Institute of Health and Center for Disease Control, as well as the Defense Department and the Department of Health and Human Resources, began a program of misrepresentation of the disease to mask their role in its origin. That's where they came up with Epstein-Barr. This is just another disease, guys. Don't worry about it. We had nothing to do with it. The Defense Department had nothing to do with it. Your chemtrails had nothing to do with it. Please, don't look up. Please, don't make up stories. Chronic fatigue syndrome, another one. Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. Top-level officials concerned with both the spread of the contagion and with the risk of their role in its origin would become publicly known to actually move to counteract the pathogen. Once again, modifications of the pathogen were synthesized in order to reverse the damage that had been done. A newly synthesized cure was developed, and a patent was issued in 1996 for an aerosol vaccination process, which would permit the vaccination of wildlife and domestic herds by spraying them or birds from the air. The bio company Maxigen was given $6.7 million in grant money from DARPA for the development of an aerosolized vaccine consisting of an anti-biological agent containing pretease subtilsin, an enzyme commonly found in laundry detergent. I remember the spraying of this chemical. They said it was like laundry detergent. It broke up biobacterial entities in ultraviolet light. This was a test that they were doing as well because of the way people were sick, and some of those trails were actually inoculation trails, and it failed. It had a reversed effect. It made things worse. In fact, they force multiplied cow blood. Of all things, they would use cow plasma to force multiply this bacterial agent they were laying in the skies. And it failed. People are still sick. People got worse. So the aerosol vaccination worked. It was $6.7 million that was basically lost in trying to find a cure for this. So it broke down bacteria cellular walls. It caused bacteria to literally explode into harmless masses, but it had to go somewhere. Other components of the mixture actually has barium and aluminum. Barium and aluminum mutate to change germs in ultraviolet light, and it can also be used to reflect light away from the Earth, causing a cooling effect. This was already documented in the 1990s. So the cooling effect and the effect of the weather, in fact, as I said, John Chancellor did a story in NBC News in the 1980s talking about how the National Weather Service and NASA were monitoring contrails. This is before the word chemtrail was even invented. They were monitoring lingering contrails to see if the cirrus formations were causing weather patterns to shift and change. Their data was released saying yes, but then all of a sudden it miraculously disappeared. No one knew. And so conspiracy theorists started talking about it in the late 1990s. In 2003, a report was filed by Tektronix Limited regarding the creation of aluminum nanopowder using DC atmospheric plasma technology for upper atmospheric dispersal. The work was funded under a contract from Quintiq, formerly the United Kingdom Defense and Evaluation Research Agency. Quintiq is also a former partner of the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is the principal contractor for the military-industrial complex. If anybody ever asks you, prove your point, you can say Operation Cloverleaf, MK Naomi, the toxin spraying during the Gulf War, fibromyalgia, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue. All those things are product of the experimentation of toxins being dropped not only on enemy soldiers, but our own soldiers. And then them coming back from the war, having sex with their wives or their girlfriends, babies being born with this toxicity. Because it carries. Everything carries when you're spreading your DNA. So we have a whole group of children, a whole group of people that are becoming passive, tired, erectile dysfunction at the age of 29. Operation Cloverleaf has been a modified atmospheric experimental program that has existed since the first Gulf War, which includes and is not limited to weather modification, military communications, space weapons development, ozone and global warming research, plus biological weaponry and aerial detection testing that uses aerosolized powders and modified agents to perform a multitude of tasks. The U.S. Department of Defense, DARPA, Department of Energy, they have a huge network of national labs and universities, private defense contractors, and pharmaceutical companies heavily involved with toxifying you, making you feel sick, having you run to the doctor, getting your medications. They're also cooperating governments of other nations and probably some United Nations agencies who are complicit since the aerosol projects have happened in global scope, not just here in the United States. In fact, at a UN hearing, a woman by the name of Rosalind Peterson, president of the Agricultural Defense Coalition, reported on the effectiveness of aerosol programs around the world, and the fact that the issue was even discussed at the UN is unprecedented. They talked about it. All you have to do is find Rosalind Peterson, look her up on the internet, you will see her speech to the UN. It's compelling. They even talk about HAARP and how it's successful in doing what it needed to do, heating the ionosphere and steering storms to areas and removing them. The geoengineering process has already begun. Others. Here's something from the summer of 2016. This is very close, very, this is like last summer. The Environmental Protection Agency formally declared that emissions from jet engines endanger the health of humans and the environment. They have even acknowledged their part in geoengineering. You probably heard this before with the other speakers. The EPA is now investigating that possibility that lingering contrails, their title, contribute to dangerous heat waves, more powerful storms, lengthening of fire seasons, and other dangerous consequences. So the EPA is now looking into this. NASA will tell you, yeah, we like chemtrails. NASA's involved with all these studies about climate disruption due to chemtrails. And they state that there's lithium in the trails. You can go back to 1915, when the proposals to control the weather first happened, when proposals of using aerosolized planes, biplanes, crop dusters were the beginning. And then if you look at the Smithsonian, they will tell you that as far back as 1946, they were putting carbon dioxide in the clouds and they created snowstorms. That's the beginning of the weather control. But you can go to GE's research laboratory, and they wanted to create the variables of the weather. And as the Cold War was heightened, weather control was seen by the United States as a potential weapon that could even be more devastating than nuclear warfare. Ho Chi Minh Trail flooded out because of weather control. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, they were seeding the clouds for fog because there was so much fog there they couldn't land their planes, so they would seed the clouds so they would snow. The Russians have their hands on weather control, which we cannot rule out that maybe some of these other trail situations are being carried out by Russian companies with Russian ideas to ruin the wheat crop so that they can have the wheat crop. Wheat crop sold to Europe, wheat crop sold to the United States. We have to get our wheat crop from Russia. If we have bad apples, we get them from Chile. It's all part of the business. The agribusiness is basically you ruin one field, you can make money off another field. Weather warfare. And we hear it's not happening, but it is. So if anybody says, hey, that's a contrail, not a chemtrail, well, they all have chemicals and water vapor and all these things that make everything horrible for all of us. They can always back off and say, we didn't do it. You gave us consent to do it. It's for national security. What we need to stop doing is giving consent. I thank you for this opportunity to speak here today. I find it great that we're talking about this. As I say, dialogue is great. You can't be an innocent bystander by just by standing. You have to speak or you're accepting it all. Thank you so much.